started. Well, I'm excited about what we're going to learn today. We are back in the book, Powernomics, by Dr. Claude Anderson, which is what he calls the National Plan to Empower Black America. And today we're going to be talking about one of the impediments to black wealth and a little bit about monopolies in the history of monopolies in America. Someone gave me an article on yesterday. They tagged me in an article on yesterday that talked about the disparity of wealth between blacks and whites. And I said, well, you know, this is not something that is brand new news. You know, it may be news to other people who are deciding to do the research for themselves to kind of validate some of what African Americans and black people have been saying for decades and even centuries. And that is the fact that we can't seem to narrow the wealth gap more than it already is because of the fact of inheritance. And that's one of the things we're going to talk about today in Dr. Claude Anderson's work. He talks about how wealth has been frozen within the white community because of inheritance and how they gain that wealth. So because, you know, of course, this is Black History Month, but we also need to understand the history of money in this country and who holds it, how did they come to hold it, and that, I believe, will also help you in terms of your own wealth building to understand how we came to be where we are so that you can work to break free of that particular system and understand how it works. Because I honestly believe that you cannot break free of something really unless you understand how it works or how it captivates people, right? The other book we're going to look at today, we're going to actually look at the founder of the company CD Baby, which was really exciting to me because that is who I produced or got my work really distributed through as far as my music. And I really enjoy the process and how that company is formed and how it still works to this day. So from Tools of Titans by Tim Ferriss, we're going to be looking at Derek Sivers and some business tips and just life tips that he's given on how to be successful and some principles that he has shared. So I'm really excited about what I am learning, and I'm excited about sharing it with you because I know that it's going to be beneficial to your life. So here we go. We are, first of all, in Dr. Claude Anderson's work, and the first section we're covering here today is the first impediment to black self-sufficiency and competitiveness is the maldistribution of wealth. The first impediment is the structural wealth inequities between blacks and whites. To begin our journey to self-empowerment, we must first understand that these inequities are structural, much like the framing of a house. The frame provides the underlying support for the walls, the ceilings, and the floors. You cannot see the framing once the walls and flooring have been completed. As long as the house stands, the way in which the house was framed will dictate not only its shape, but also the mobility of the people who live inside the house. The structural racial inequalities of wealth and resource powers function in the same way. They are buried in the fabric of American society. They dictate life chances, rewards, and opportunities, and explain how people act in race matters. Whites have had such a total control over wealth, power, resources, and basic necessities of life that it has become the norm. Okay? And so one of the things that he expresses here is the truth that the majority of wealth held in this country is held by white people. And so they don't see them not holding the majority of wealth. They don't see that as not being a normal thing in a competitive society. They don't realize, a lot of them don't realize that they came to hold the majority of wealth through black labor or through the slave trade, right? And a lot of them do not seem to connect the fact that that wealth that was stored through stocks, through bonds, through insurance policies and companies was passed on to them generationally. And so when you ask, about the inequities in our society, they don't necessarily tie the two together. Racial myths have long promoted the belief that the conditions of Black Americans are the consequence of nature rather than the result of the nation's historical acts. The structural inequalities of race can only persist if the historical origin of white control of wealth, resources, and power remain either unknown or ignored. White society will not publicly admit that its powerful self-interest perpetuate the legacy of slavery and Jim Crow semi-slavery. The critical contributions of Black people to the development of this nation and the Western civilization are largely hidden, right? We just even had a movie that came out with the title Hidden Figures. Why? Because they were pretty much, the contributions of Black people were pretty much kept out of the public eye. It was kept out of society's sight. I don't know for those who got a chance to see the movie, but in one part in particular, you notice that the Black computers, or the calculators as the women were called, they were all standing there together, but there was an entire section of Black women that was separated or set apart off from everyone else. And so the cameras were filming, right? They were there, but when the cameras were filming, because they were separated, it was very easy for the camera, right, to pan through and only get the white people involved with NASA. So again, you've got this notion of Black people who have been contributors to our society, but a lot of what we have contributed has been hidden, right? Or it's been unacknowledged, or many of our ideas, many of our patents, many of our inventions have been appropriated by the white people at the time who had the power and who had the privilege of being able to get those things patented as their own. So a lot of times you'll find in your history, as you're reading, you're finding out about these different people who invented things. Like, I think it was recently I saw just a little video about Jack Daniels, and how Jack Daniels, his signature drink or whatever, came from a Black man who gave him the recipe. But again, this is something that has been hidden in our society. And I am one to believe that we're living in a time and a season where many things that were hidden about our culture still to this day are going to be exposed. Why? Because everything that is done in the dark shall come to light. So he says to admit Black people's contributions is to trigger white guilt and a sense of responsibility for Black people's predicament. Because if you start admitting how many ways that Black Americans have contributed to this country, then it's going to bring on guilt. Why? Because you have not made retribution, you have not made recompense for all of the free labor, the free ideas, the free inventions that you took advantage of from a group of people whose ancestors you never compensated. So what do we oftentimes do when we don't want to feel guilt about something, right? We simply ignore it, or we simply try to hide what it is so that we don't have to feel the guilt associated with our responsibility to make something right. According to records, and thank you all for those of you who are coming in, if you have followers, I'm going to ask that you share this broadcast. According to records, the majority society compiled its wealth by using a simple economic principle. The industry of slavery produced a 1,500% return on investment without the burden of wages. This is key, because if I can get a return on my investment, but I don't have to pay any of the people that worked then I don't have the burden of the thing that we call wages in a business. Employee benefits, I don't have to worry about that. And taxes, I don't have to worry about that. The lifetime profits produced by slaves were passed on to the slaveholders' heirs and their heirs' heirs. Wealth accumulated for white society, while poverty accumulated for blacks. Our nation claims to be an equal opportunity, colorblind society after more than a century of maldistributing the nation's land and wealth-producing resources to everyone but blacks. Even after Jim Crow segregation ended in the 1960s and this nation formally became a just society, the white society committed only $15 billion to conduct a quote-unquote war on poverty. But what that actually became was a policy called benign neglect. That is a term that I encourage you to look up. Benign neglect. B-E-N-I-G-N. Benign neglect. It was a policy that said that we would pull back resources, especially within the black community, and simply let those communities, thank you, Rochelle, let those communities decay. So we're not going to hurt them. We're just not going to harm them. We're just not going to help them, but we're also not going to harm them. We're just going to let them decay. We're not going to facilitate growth. We're not going to facilitate health. We're not going to pour any money into those communities. We're simply going to let them decay. And if you look across our nation, Ferguson, Missouri, Flint, Michigan, Detroit, Chicago, certain parts of Chicago, you can see this policy in effect visually with your own eyes, that these communities, that even though funding may have been going into the city, certain communities were left to decay. That is what happened. All right. Since this program included every group in America, it is unclear how this limited effort was supposed to correct the centuries of abuse inflicted specifically on blacks. Social conservatives argue that 7 years of the Great Society programs fulfill all the responsibilities that white society had to blacks for 400 years of slavery and Jim Crow and semi-slavery. Neither the U.S. government nor social conservatives have offered a public explanation for including every other group of people, ethnic, class, Spanish-speaking, and disabled groups into a program that was supposedly to pay the debt the nation owed to black people. So what happened? Because they decided to include all these other groups in programs that were supposed to be specifically directed to righting the wrongs of what they had done to African Americans, they diluted the effect that the programs could have had. And what he's saying is, nobody is talking about that. Nobody is talking about how these programs were specifically supposed to right the wrongs of what had been done to black people in this country. Ironically, during the same 7-year period, this nation spent $120 billion on war in Vietnam. So you're talking about $15 billion to go to the war on poverty, which was then further diluted by including all these other people groups, and $120 billion to the war in Vietnam, which was 8 times larger than the amount spent on the war on poverty. Hidden behind the facade of a colorblind society, racism in the 1970s became politically incorrect. To maintain the status quo, structural racism replaced overt racism, and the term minorities replaced blacks. So that's how we got to the term minority, because they no longer wanted to just single out black people when they were talking. They just decided to kind of lump the people of color in, and we went to this term minorities. Our monopolized society. Racism in America has gone through a number of mutations, though always retaining its inequities. It is now practically impossible for members of our society to see and prove racism against black people. It is now hidden behind a pseudo smokescreen. Social conservatives and the power elite praised MLK, but now they have picked up the rhetoric of the black civil rights movement and distorted the intent of the movement. They proclaimed that racial inequality no longer existed and all groups were starting out even. Thus, they created an illusion. Just like the drunk who took a pet alligator into a bar, cut off its tail, painted it yellow, and called it a dog, social conservatives and the power elite are taking racism through a similar false transformation. However, no matter how it is camouflaged, racism is still right before our eyes. Old-fashioned racism has gone legitimate again, masquerading with all of the rights and privileges of approved monopolies. And you got to realize that Dr. Anderson wrote this book before 2000. So he's telling you, even then, that old school racism was now legitimized again. Here we are in 2017, and we have old school racism running the White House. And there are a lot of people yet who don't seem to understand what that means. When you have old school racism running the White House, you're going to have policies that are developed and that are put out deliberately targeted not just at people of color, but deliberately targeted at black people. And we're already seeing it. In the news yesterday, one of the first cases where a mother who had been here since she was 14, she's only 20, she's been here 22 years, and they arrested her and deported her, and it was confirmed that she was sent back to Mexico, and she had not been back to Mexico in 22 years. She leaves 2 teenage children in the United States to fend for themselves. They picked her up, they booked her, and they deported her. And the lady has been living here for 22 years. It's already happening, but because it's not happening on a wider scale, keyword yet, people are not panicking. But can you imagine? You wake up one day, getting ready to go to school, and this is also happening, you can check it out in the news, North Carolina, South Carolina. Parents who are dropping their kids off at the elementary school, they have the international customs people waiting for them at the drop-off of their children. So they're waiting until their children are dropped off at school and arresting them right in the drop-off line for school. And now you have children who are without parents that are stuck at schools, and principals are trying to figure out what are they going to do with this child because the United States just picked up their parents at the drop-off line. This is happening as we speak. Policies have consequences. So, he says, the word monopoly emanates from the word monarch. According to Charles R. Geist, yes, and believe it or not, that is in violation of a child's rights. You're not supposed to be, law enforcement and things are not supposed to be interviewing your child if they're under 18 without an adult present. So these executive orders that are coming down are allowing people to operate in a very illegal and lawless manner while claiming to be law enforcement. And my thing is, just because it hasn't happened to your family yet, just because it's not happening to your family yet, doesn't mean that it won't in the future. This is what happened in 1930s Germany. Because Hitler, when he came to power, He wasn't all of a sudden rounding Jews up and sending them to death camps. It started out incrementally. It started out with laws. It started out with the Jews being brutalized and being beaten. First by law enforcement and then by fellow citizens. This is why it's important to study what has happened in the past so that we don't repeat it. But we're repeating a lot of what happened in early 1930s Germany. And unfortunately, guess what? People's response is exactly the same as to what was happening in early 1930s Germany. Many people sat back for a long time and thought, it cannot happen to me, or it's not going to happen to my family, or because I'm German, it's not necessarily going to happen to me. But 12 million people were murdered. Not just Jewish people. 6 million Jews, but 6 million others. So let's get back to this monopoly piece. The word monopoly emanates from the word monarch. According to Charles R. Geist, the author of Monopolies in America, the tradition of monopolies was inherited from English common law. The British Crown granted patent letters to merchants, giving them exclusive right to provide certain goods or services. Any monopoly conveys the ultimate source of power, wealth, and control to a person, group, or business. When a business entity has a monopoly, it dominates and controls nearly all aspects of an industry and can use its massive power to raise barriers, to control the market, and to bankrupt their competitors. A racial monopoly, like any other monopoly, is defined by its origin and the power it has over its competitors. On its way to becoming the essence of various white monopolies, racism has passed through what he calls 3 monopolistic stages. And so I'll give you the 3 stages and then we'll stop right there. And next Friday, we'll come back and talk about a brief history of how monopolies were built in America. All right. The first stage is natural monopoly, that protects things that are strategically vital to the government itself. In race matters, whiteness in all its ramifications, as was always strategically vital and invaluable, entitling its bearer to wealth, privilege, authority, power, and certain inalienable rights. In case we don't know or don't realize, the United States Constitution codified whiteness as a national asset. If you recall, the Constitution was originally written for rich, white, male landowners. That's who it was written for. All right? Various state and local governments passed anti-miscegenation laws that defined whiteness and protected it from race mixing. Now, believe it or not, in 2017, you still have people, and they're still on the books some places, where what they call anti-miscegenation laws, or not mixing with other races, is still on the law books. I was reading an article yesterday, and I found out that, what's the university? Bob Jones University, which is a Christian university, has on its books laws for their college against interracial dating. Somebody explain that one to me. You're a Christian college, and you have on your books no interracial dating allowed at your college. Look it up. All right. The second kind of monopoly is collusive monopoly. This monopoly exists when members of a tightly knit group of public agencies or private corporations enter into specific agreements to control the marketplace or wealth, power, or resources of a society over their common competitor. In race matters, a collusive monopoly is when the nation continuously expands the definition of whiteness to include a hierarchy of ethnic groups. So today, this is important because a lot of people don't understand. I know in the black neighborhoods, a lot of people don't understand how certain groups are able to come and build wealth in their black neighborhoods. They don't understand. Why do we have Korean shops? Why do we have Arabic gas stations in the black neighborhood? What just happened? All right. Today, the definition of whiteness includes a succession of immigrants from Europe, the Middle East, some Spanish-speaking countries, and Asia. So when they come over here, they're classified as white.